Welcome back to part 2 of the Pointillism sphere. So, just looking at it from a little bit further away, well, a couple things. I did use like this lighter orange in the highlighted area, and I did a couple dots in the background. I did it in the surface too. I also added some pink. It's an analogous color to orange. I did a couple of that in the surface, a couple dots in the background. So as you're working and you have a color on your brush, to have more variety, I would do a couple layers. Okay, so now I'm ready to like really refine. I probably need to add like another layer in here. I need to definitely work on my cast shadow, and I feel like the surface needs to get a little bit lighter. So I am going to start with white. So a couple of things. My paint is starting to dry out in here because I've had it just sitting out. And so I'm going to take my medium brush or a small brush and just dunk it in the water and then swirl it into the paint to kind of re-wet it. And I kind of scrape the edges a little bit. Just kind of re-wets it a little bit. And then, like this one is totally dry. I would let it totally dry. We're going to do this probably before the actual final painting. And you can like peel it out. You just like pick it off. So that's what we'll do later. But for now, if it's dry, you can just put paint on top of it and then it will harden, and then you just, peel it off when you're done. Okay, so for this white, I'm just gonna swirl this color and make that into a color. I added a little bit of water on my brush. Just dunked the brush in the water. You kind of squeegee off what's extra, and then I probably dish out some white in another location. All right, so then my warm red, just kind of swirl that in there. Can become a slightly different warm red. And if it's really, really chunky, that means it's getting a little too dry. And I was able to smash those chunks down. So you can kind of reconstitute a little bit if you catch it before it starts to harden. But if it's not really shiny anymore, it's dry. And you can just put more paint on top of it. And then right before we do our painting, we'll clean this out and start again. Okay, so I actually am going to scoop out some of that white. I wonder if you guys can see that. Can I scoot over a little bit? Okay. Cleaning out my brush, wiping it off on the newspaper. I'm going to do a tiny bit of yellow because I want it to be a really, really bright, super light yellow. Smashing that. Okay. All right, then, since I already had water on my brush, I feel like this is liquidy enough. Now to refine, I'm definitely going to dot like along the edge, because this edge is lighter anyway, and anywhere where it looks like in here, you can't really tell there's dots there. They're so layered on top of each other, they're starting to disappear. So I'm definitely going to put like a little dot in between there. Oh, you guys really can't see that, sorry. Maybe if I zoom in, no, not really. But I am dotting along the edge. So I am starting to kind of refine the edges. Well, I was kind of doing it all along, but in this stage, you definitely want to refine edges. And I'm going to build up this really light yellow. And then, of course, I'm going to go back and add some straight up white little dots, which I'll probably have to get my little paint containers for, since my white is now not super white anymore. Okay, so while I have this color on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and add some in the surface where it's lighter. So I'd say like along this edge it's a little lighter. And the idea is that it's not polka dotted looking. And you definitely want to hold your brush like a little bit more vertical. Like those dots are pretty big. I'll fade those out a little bit. So I'm trying to dot where it looks like just blobs of paint. And not just dotting along the edge, but kind of doing a couple to fade out. So that kind of lightens the surface a little bit. And so I'm kind of comparing, I look at the edges, like the fact that this edge along the sphere is slightly darker than the background or the surface it's sitting on. I feel like my mid-tone area doesn't have, it definitely, I have a line there, especially like in here. So I'm gonna fade that out when I add another layer. Okay, so I am going to do, so I'm gonna get my bigger brush, scoop out some of my red, and I'm just gonna add it to this puddle. So that's what I was doing here. I have like, I don't know, like I think I have like 3 different colors that happened there in that puddle. So I just kind of use it so that you're getting an analogous color. I'm gonna scoop a little bit more of that red. Okay, and then if I want, I don't think I want to darken it too much, but I might add a little bit of orange to it. Maybe not. Let me see what this red looks like on the sphere. Okay, so this I'm going to definitely add in the core shadow on the sphere. And then I'm going to touch a couple in the background and in the cast shadow, just a little bit so that you see the color in multiple locations. So I will say on this sphere, I did add a little bit of blue in that core shadow because blue's complement is orange. So therefore the two kind of look like brown optical blending like George Seurat used. I need to add a little bit of water. So I'm just dunking my brush in the water, swirling it into my puddle. And of course this is the tiny brush. And I'm gonna twist and get all the paint off the brush and then pick up just a little bit of a blob on the edge of my brush. And then be a little more precise with my little dots of color. I'm gonna go along the edge too. Clean up that edge a little. Okay, so definitely fading up into the midtones. So again, trying to hold my brush as vertically as possible so that I'm getting actual dots. And I really think adding a little bit of water to the puddle helps with that too. So you're not getting globs of paint. So this one is probably, I would say this is like more time consuming than the Van Gogh, but it always looks cool. I mean, it's kind of hard to mess it up unless you don't have clean edges and you can't tell what it is you're looking at, which happens sometimes. So I'm definitely gonna add in the parts that don't look like there's dots. And probably add a little bit in the background. Although I feel like, okay, so that's definitely fading there a little bit better. Looking at my image, I don't know, maybe a little bit over here. I feel like this is almost good the way it fades up. Okay, so I'm definitely gonna tap a couple of the red in the background. So that's the way that you can get like a lot of variety without doing much work, is if you have a color on your brush. And usually like in the background, whenever I was almost done with like whatever was on my brush, I just kind of tapped it into the background, knowing that I was gonna come back over with a dark color anyway. Okay, so now I'm gonna come back in with my white and probably do like a layer or two of color. So pardon, sorry, I apologize. I need to get my actual white container. And I'm gonna use that same stick that I used before for white. My white stick. Oh, I use the rubber bands from the brushes to hold them together. Okay, so again, I can always get more, but you're losing paint because it will start drying out. And then with the paper towel, I'm gonna wipe off my stick. So you can always just dish out more on top of what you have, but if it's kind of chunky, you don't probably want to be putting new paint on top of chunky paint. My suggestion is, like for this green one, it's starting to dry. I'm gonna let that one just dry and then I'll peel it out and I'll just use it for something else. Okay, so I am going to get a blob of white because I want to add a little bit of water to it. Okay, dunk my tiny brush in the water. Ooh, that actually had color on my brush. Oh well. Swirl it around. Okay, looking at the brightest parts. So when I have a lot on my brush, I try not to press very hard because then you're gonna get, like the bristles will get smashed down and then you don't get dots anymore. You just get blobs of paint, which we're trying to avoid. If you want blobs of paint, you can definitely do that for post-impressionism. It's like one of the ways that you can just blob the paint on your canvas. For this one, we want like a definite, you know, dot. And so people that like meticulous activity, I feel like this is a lot like coloring to me. Like a coloring book. I don't really love coloring. It's just like the same thing again and again, but it's relaxing. It lowers your heart rate, as does painting. Until we start blending and then it's frustrating. Okay, so I'm just gonna go a little bit more in the centery part and a little bit on this edge. So I feel like my highlight is good. I would look at it from far away and just got my eyes and kind of make them fuzzy. Okay, I feel like it needs to fade out a little bit more. And so I'm trying not to dot on top of the other dots I've previously added. Okay. All right, now I'm going to do the surface a little, looking at where it's lightest. And again, trying to put more dots like where it looks like just blobs, where the dots aren't very visible. This one I feel like is going to need another layer of blue anyway. Okay, double checking, maybe a few. So definitely this one you need to like take a step or two back if you feel like, oh, I'm done. And remember that while you guys were working today in class, actually, I like threw a layer on in between classes, like a color or two. I kind of worked a little bit more than in the video, just because it takes so long and, you know, honestly. You're gonna watch me make little dots? Probably not. Okay. And then if it gets too crazy of a color, I probably come back with like an orange and then you can dot some of the original color like we did for Van Gogh. For that, I'm gonna do that more in the background and the surface because I feel like my sphere looks pretty decent. It has like a lot of range of color in it. And I'm making sure, yeah, all right. Okay. So I'm gonna use that same blob and I'm gonna just like pull out a little bit of, actually I should try to use whatever's here. A little bit of water on my brush. Swirl it in. Okay, so with this blue, I'm going to bring back the blue to the surface. And it's fairly light. So anywhere where it doesn't look like dots, again. Yeah, my background, maybe just a couple in the background. Or surface. Okay, now I feel like I just need to throw another layer or two on the cast shadow. So I'm going to do just the straight up dark blue from the container. And maybe I'm going to take a little bit, might as well just take a little bit of that red, make it a super dark. Actually, I will do two different colors here. That's a super dark purple. That is probably very hard to tell in this camera that it's purple. Add a little bit of white to it. Okay. Looks more violet-y. A little bit of water. Oh, now it's more red violet. Okay. I'm going to throw layers on that, and I think I do need to use like a lighter blue in this background. I got too many random colors happening. Okay, let's grab some in the cast shadow. So I'm going to definitely dot along the edge to see if I can clean up that edge a little. It's a little misshapen. I'm going to fade out into surface. Okay. Maybe a couple where it's slightly darker on the surface. And while I have some, I'm just going to dot some in the core shadow. Might as well just be careful and use it up. Does that darken it? Okay. All right. Background. So I'm kind of coming back with that original color and dotting back in. So if you kind of lost the original color that you wanted it to be, the fabulous thing about paint is just paint on top of it. A little more water. I'm actually going to take some of this purple. Twisting my brush. All right, picking some up just on the very end. Kind of dotting along the edge as well. And if I see any blobs of paint, that is definitely what I'm going on top of. To make the blobs look smaller, I'll go like along the edge of the blob, or right in the center of the blob. Okay, I'm gonna do the cast shadow a little bit more. Actually, that's too much on my brush. So this one definitely, because you're just plopping, layers of paint on top of layers of paint, this one ends up having texture to it. So if you like a lot of texture, I'd probably say this one, or maybe Post-Impressionism, depending on how thick you put your paint. So if you want like a really textured, like real texture where you can like feel the paint, this one and one of the Post-Impressionisms that I'll show you in the next video might work out for you. don't know, that cast shadow still looks funky to me. I think maybe I'll fade some medium. Okay, so I need some medium in the background anyway. Make a tone of that blue. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of orange and add it to it to deepen it slightly. Twist my brush. And then lift up paint just on the very end. Let's start over here. Okay, I feel like it needs to be a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to swirl in the rest of this white that's underneath it. Go with this blob. Do a little bit in the darkest part just for some variety. Okay, so that lightens up the background. I feel like over here it needs to go a little bit lighter, so I'm going to dot along the edge, but sparingly, so it doesn't look dotted with an outline. And then kind of fade out a little bit. Again, keeping my paintbrush pretty vertical. Pretty much unlike we would hold anything else, because everything else is kind of at an angle. Okay, that lightens it. All right, I'm going to throw some on the ground surface. Okay, and I'm going to do some tiny little, I hope this doesn't look too much. If it does, ignore. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Pretty much like along the edge where I wanted it to kind of fade out into the surface. But look from far away a little bit. Oh, I got a blob in there. Oh well. So I think just like the bottom of this sphere now, I'm going to take just the straight up blue. Oh, I have some over here. I'll just use that. Well, it's kind of lumpy right there. I wanted to fix that. Go over that little blob. Fade out a little bit more. Okay. I'm going to call it done. I could probably work on that for a whole nother hour. But I have more than 10 layers, at least 10. I went over my highlight. I went over my core shadow a little bit more. And then I did a lighter layer on the surface, kind of lightened the background and darkened in the areas that I needed to. And if you get up really, really, really close, I don't know how in focus this is going to be. You can't, oh, it's not very in focus. But you can see, like, I used more than just orange in there. I used some blue, purple, red, brown, green, and then of course I went back in with like a darker reddishy orange and orange. And so the same thing kind of on the surface, like you can see little hints of like yellow and pink, but from far away, or if you squint your eyes and make them fuzzy, they look blue. So that's what you're aiming for, is a little bit of variety, but if you squint your eyes and make it fuzzy, it looks like the color you want it to be. Okay, so I'd say finish up, do it well. This is like a project. It's worth a chunk of points. Craftsmanship definitely counts, and part of that, well, a big part of that is refining with paint. So the next video is going to be post-impressionism. I'm going to show you a bunch of different brush strokes, and then we'll probably paint both of these to get ready for the last two techniques. All right, I'll see you in the next video.